Hello everyone, welcome to this edition of OptionVue Essentials. My name is Ken Dole and we're going to get started here in just a moment. See people still filtering in. I'm going to share my desktop here. You'll see my OptionVue in just a second. All right. So what I'm going to do today is just approach it from the viewpoint of a brand new user of the program, and we're just going to run through a lot of the important features of OptionVue and all the setup that will get you going in the right direction. So for a new user, this is all the kind of important information, and get you functioning with OptionVue as quickly as possible. If you listened to any of my previous webinars, I've talked mainly about BackTrader for the last several months. So we're going to take a little break from that. I'm going to briefly get into BackTrader as the setup part of it. But we're not going to focus on that. I'm not going to spend a whole half an hour on that today. So let's start out just with the quotes display. So this is what you're going to see when you first load the program. It's a brand new OptionVue copy. And so what we can do to bring in some symbols here, you notice if you click on one of these symbols, say price line, for example, we have all these buttons up at the top which you can use related to that asset, that symbol. So if we click price chart, for example, we can open up a price chart. If we click matrix, we can open up an option matrix. It'll look like that initially. And we can also run a survey here, and that is probably the quickest way to bring in some symbols. But before we do that, though, I want to talk about creating a new tab, because we can manage our symbols pages here, this main symbol page, by tabs. So if I right-click on the bottom and click Add a Tab, for example, if I wanted to add a list of futures symbols, I would just create that tab and then create a header up here. Just call it Futures 1 or whatever. I did that by using the Shift-pound key. If you want to create a new header, it's managed by, so we're going to use the Shift-pound key and then type in whatever the header you want to call that grouping. So now that you've got the header, we can basically input symbols in here. So what we're going to do is click on Survey and run a survey for future symbols. And then we're going to bring them into the quotes display. Rather than typing in a bunch of future symbols, we're just going to bring them in this way. So what I can do is once I'm in the survey window here, type in the number of assets that you want to create symbols for. We're going to use 50 here, and then put in the greatest dollar volume of options for both of these, for pick and sort, on the drop downs here. And then put in a minimum, this DVO is dollar volume of options, put in 0 there, and then click Go. So it's going to bring in then a list of symbols. So the next step then to get them into your quotes display is to highlight the top one, scroll all the way down to the bottom of the list, use the Shift key and highlight them all, and then click Insert. So if you could do it one at a time, or you can bring them in all at once by highlighting in this fashion and then click Insert. It doesn't look like it did anything, but now if we go back to the quotes display, using the Window tab up here, we can navigate to our open windows in OptionVue. Window quotes display gets us back there, and you see it put all the symbols in. And we've got a scroll bar there, quite a few of them. So now we've got all of the futures, which actually the symbols are fairly complicated. In this case of the SP, that's the big futures for the S&P 500. The first two letters designate the future, and then you have to put a space, and then the U is for the month, designates the month of the contract, of the futures contract, and the 3 is for the year. So if I open up a matrix now, I've got a futures matrix, and there we go. So if we wanted to create another tab, let's just say we want stocks. So now we've got a third tab. If you wanted to create several headers in here, you could. You can run more searches using OpScan and Survey and input them into a separate tab. So we could create a tab for OpScan, another tab for Survey, and so on. And once you've got symbols, and I could create another one, I'll just do it as a test here, and I'll show you how you can do this. Futures 2. Say I wanted to transfer a list of symbols from one tab to another. I have to first right-click on the first highlight it, then right-click and move this group into Futures 2. First highlight the header bar, then right-click, and now they're all over here. So it took them out of Futures and put them over into Futures 2. And then if you want to change the order of the tabs here, you can just right-click Manage Tabs, and it opens up this window, Change Tab Order. So we could move the OpScan down on the list, the stocks up on the list, and so on. So that way you can quickly organize your, I've got, in my copy of OptionView, I've got about 15 of these, some for indexes and so on. So this keeps everything organized and keeps from having to scroll down looking for a symbol. So that's the main thing about getting started in the quotes display. As far as the, if you had your own list of symbols in the quote in an Excel spreadsheet, you could bring them into OptionView as long as you were, let's say you were bringing in a bunch of symbols from your brokerage account that you were using. So we'll just say, I use TOS, we'll just say TOS1. We'll create a header there. So again, we use the Shift pound key to create a new grouping. And we'll call it brokerage stocks. Oh. And so now, if you had an Excel spreadsheet open and you had a list of symbols, you could just highlight the symbol column of that spreadsheet and copy the entire symbol column and then click Edit, Paste Symbols. And it would bring in whatever you had put on your clipboard into that grouping in your quotes display. So if you had 100 symbols you wanted to get in from another source, boom, there they all are, as long as they're an Excel sheet to start with, easy. So those are the main ways you can get symbols into the quotes display. The next thing I want to move on to is getting your auto strike settings for the matrix setup. So back to the main page here, we're going to open up Apple, for example. So we open up an Apple matrix. Initially, the matrix looks like this. And you see everything's kind of, you can get a lot of months in this way, but you don't see a lot of data. So what we could do is create a format that will show you a lot more columns per series, per expiration, by using the Format tab here. And under Options, I can create a cell size of 1 × 6, cell size, for example. And so then that gives me market price, implied volatility. I always like to watch implied volatility, trade, which is going to be where you're entering your proposed trades, and then existing position will be for any trades that you've actually got recording in the program. So you need that column. You need these two columns. If you need some kind of price, you could use bid ask, for example, instead of market price. But I prefer to have it at least 5 or 6 columns so I can see different categories here. There's a lot of available parameters in the matrix that you can use, so you can play around with this. But for example, I could put up delta as one of them on the last section here, and original price is one of my settings that I use. So that way, if you're selling an option, you can, and you want to take it off at a certain percentage of the premium sold. You can easily see it there. So now I've got that set up the way I want it, and if I want to save it, I have 3 possible settings that I can save here under the Set Default button in the upper left. So if I click 1 and then click OK, now it is saved, and the way to retrieve it, if you're opening up a different matrix, would be just to click on the little 1 next to Format here. So if I click on 2, it's going to bring up whatever the default setting was for the number 2 tab there. And if I wanted to retrieve the one I just created, then I would click 1 again. So there it is. And if I want to do that globally and have it set up so every matrix has that available, then I would click on the View tab up in the upper left here. This is all your global settings for the program. So these will apply to any new matrix you open up. It won't change the settings for an existing matrix that you already have created settings for, but any new ones you open will use these settings here. So if we use View Default Model, we'll get into that in a minute. Let's go to View Default Auto Strike first. So we can, normally the way the program is set, we're going to use small settings for in-the-money options, a small extent range, and we're going to use a moderate strike range for the out-of-the-monies. So if you were using selling way out-of-the-money options for some reason, then you would want to change the out-of-the-money put extent to large. And you can have the choice here of including weeklies. So we're going to do that. Because weeklies are popular, I trade them. So we're going to put in the weeklies, or just check that box there. And you can put in a minimum number of months here as well. So once you get everything set, also this is important, to strike intervals. You could display every strike or only 10-point strikes, for example. That'll minimize the data that your program is updating. If, for example, you were only using 10-point strikes, rather than displaying everything, because every symbol in an option matrix counts as one symbol on your data feed. So you have a 1,000 symbol limit. You notice up here in the upper right, that tells you how many symbols we're currently using. If I was only using 10-point strikes, I could just click this, and then I would use less symbols. Matrix would open with only those 10-point intervals. So we're going to click OK now. It's going to open any new matrix that I create with those settings. So there we go. And you have 3 available, as I mentioned, matrix formats. So we could create another one here. Let's do another popular one, useful one for me, is to show the time premium. And in OptionVue, the time premium is the extrinsic value of the option, the part of the option that decays as time goes by. So that's an important one. And then the theta, for example, would be the rate of decay of that time premium. So we could put up theta as one here. So that's another favorite setting of mine. So I'm going to save that as number 2. And then for the final one, we could put up a bid and ask, for example. Instead of using a market price, we could just put up bid and ask. If you want to see quickly what the bid and ask is, you can just flip to that setting. There we go. We'll save that as number 3. Now we've got these all at our disposal. We can click 1 for the delta and the original price. We can click 2 for the time premium and the theta. And we can click 3 to see the bid and ask of your options. And back and forth like that. And that is, actually, it's going to also show up here under View Default Matrix Format. So whatever you do here also applies to this matrix format button. So if you don't have 3 under the global setting, 3 settings under the global setting, and then 3 more for each individual option, there's only 3 for the whole program. So if you change the setting in the global setting, it's changing it for the individual matrix as well. So that's the matrix format set up. Now there's a lot more parameters and what we can do to see all the option data that's available. And sometimes this is very, very important, is we can double click anywhere on the row for an individual option. Say we want the at the money, August expiring in 2 days. We could just double click it. It opens up what we call the expand window, and it gives everything that's available for that option, all the open interest, high, low, market price, last, theoretical price, mid-implied volatility, and the Greeks. Everything's available right there at a glance. You can see the last time for that option traded, and you can see the high and low for the day, volume for the day, and so on. Very useful. The other thing you can do here is if you do have a position, so I'm going to close it and put a position on here to say we bought one of these. And then I can open up the expand window. Again, I can project a different price for Amazon in this case. So if I put it in at 300, and we wanted to see what the price of our option would be at 300, price of 300, just type in project underlying price to 300 and put in a number of days forward. It could be today or it could be any number of days. We only have 2 days to expiration here. So just type in a 1, and now it's going to project the price tomorrow. If Amazon got to 300, that's what our theoretical price of our option would be. It'd be worth $15. So that's the matrix. Let's move on to some of the other parameters that are available. And if you right-click the header here, you can see a list of the full parameters that OptionVue has. So we can get up the all of the Greeks are available. We can put in percent over or undervalued. That one could be very useful. So say you don't have enough settings to create. Unfortunately, you can only do 3 settings here. So you can temporarily change any column just by right-clicking the header and selecting any of these. We wanted to see the gamma back to percent over undervalued. So this just tells you that according to the theoretical price in OptionVue, based on the modeling, that option is 5% undervalued. And then down here, for the 270 put, that option is 7% undervalued according to the theoretical prices in OptionVue. So that can be useful if you see some anomalies there. Of course, it's better to sell the overvalued options and buy the undervalued options. So that can be a useful tool. All right, let's move on to volume. We could put up volume. Open interest is another one that is very important. So we have open interest down here. You can quickly see that actually is a very good one to keep handy. So if you wanted to set that, we could just create that as one of the saved settings. Put it in as open interest. And if we click the M and 3, now it's saved it there. The M is going to save whatever you click next. So now my third setting has open interest in it. The other thing you can do is actually make a trade right from the expand window. In this trade column here, I could execute a trade from that window. But let me show you first how you would execute a trade from the matrix. So the first step in getting going with OptionVue is to enter an option here and just analyze the graph. So we're going to project that graph out. And we have a number of timelines here in the upper left. So that's to say we like that trade. Now we could convert it into an account. So I'm going to create a new account here. Next. Let's call it test 1. Put in a starting amount of 50,000. Leave all these as 0. We're going to put in commissions, gain loss to include previously realized gain losses. Put in our security commissions for options. Just put $1. For me, it's $1, whatever your price per contract is. Transaction minimum if you have one. All that information can be input there. So once you have that account created, click OK. Now you can actually convert the trade and record, paper trade it, or if you have a real trade going, you can track the results. So if we convert that trade over, now it's going to show up in the transaction log. There it is. We just bought that option and it automatically entered it there. So now if you were missing this existing position column, you wouldn't necessarily know if you had that position on or not. So it's easy to keep track of if you keep that existing position column in your matrix. Let's move on to the graphical analysis. So with the graphical analysis, we can do a lot of things here. We can actually project the price of that option over time and price on the horizontal axis here. We can just click and drag the little wand here and slide it along. We can see the profit or loss as we move up and down with the little wand in the box, in the green box below. So there we have a profit at expiration now. That's T+2. That's when the option expires. We would lose $110 at this price, the $286.49. If I moved it down to here, if I thought it would fall to there, you could see we would lose the full amount of the option, $258. But what if it went up 1 standard deviation? We would make $397. Then you could change the timeline by clicking the little box here or by clicking the line on the graph, and that will allow you to see what it would be in 1 day or today. T+0 is today. So there we go with, it'll change it a little bit. Let's put a little more interesting position on. Let's put a condor on the weekly. We'll come out here and sell 5 of these. Buy 5. I'll put up a different format here. And we'll come down here and sell 5 here. Buy 5. So if I wanted to, if I was thinking about putting this trade on, the first thing I would do is just click the little T button next to Analyze here and click Analyze and see what that trade would look like. You're too zoomed in here, so you can't really see what's happening. If you click across on the horizontal axis just below the bottom of the graph here, I'm just left clicking and dragging, it'll zoom out. The other way to do that is just click the little minus sign over here on the left. It'll also do the same thing. So you can quickly do it just by clicking and dragging on the graph just below the bottom of the graph. Or if you click and drag right, you're going to zoom in. Now we've got 3 timelines you can see over here on the left. That legend is your guide to what timelines you have in your graph. You can increase that to 5 timelines. I would like to see 5 timelines to analyze if I'm taking a position. I might want to just project where I can get out at my projected profit. You can click on the T+5 line and see what your yield would be at that point. So if I click on the little wand again and change the vertical axis over here to yield, and now I can see that I have an 8% yield in 5 days for that condor. If I wanted to see what it would be in only 2 days, then I would click on the T+2 line or click on the line itself. Either one will do it. And there we have a 2% yield. So then it's also giving your break-evens on that 2-day timeline. And so you would be profitable anywhere between those break-evens in 2 days. Now, say, for example, there was an event and you were thinking, well, in 3 days, what it's going to be. You could customize a timeline just by right-clicking on the legend box here. It'll open up the projected dates box, and you can change the date of one of these just by highlighting the date using the bracket key on the keyboard. And I'll just scroll forward 1 day by using the right bracket key just to the right of the P on the keyboard. And now I've created my own customized timeline at T+3. And then I can see what the yield would be at T+3. It's a 4% return. So that's very useful. That's primarily what I use OptionVue for. I'm going to propose a trade that I like, analyze it using the graph, project where I might get my target yield, and then if I like the trade, or if I actually put the trade on my brokerage, the next step is to convert the trade. Now it's in the transaction log. So now it's going to track my results. This account will track the result going forward. It'll give you a profit and loss in the summary section of the matrix down below. Everything that you have in an existing position column will create a profit or loss down here. So tomorrow, if I look at this position, it's going to show a gain-loss down here. So if I just put in one as a test and I didn't necessarily want to keep it in the transaction log, easy to get rid of. That first one I put on, just highlight the date, click delete on your keyboard, gone. The whole line disappears. Click OK. Now it disappears from the existing position column. And there we go. That's my trade. So one other thing that we can do here, see now it says no trades to analyze. I'm clicked on the T. That means it's only going to show me whatever I have in the trade column there. So I'd have to click on the E or for existing position in order to get this to show up on the graph. Or I could click B for both existing and trade. We'll get to that in a minute, but let's just analyze this. Another thing you could do is say you wanted a set interval here for your horizontal axis. For example, 5-point intervals for an asset. You can create your own customized axis interval by right-clicking anywhere on the graph. Set your center price however you want it, and the interval at 5 points. We can change the interval there. Click OK. And now you see you got a 5-point interval graph. And we could change the center to 300, for example. Click OK. Just moved everything over. So that's very useful as well. Now notice down on the bottom it's showing that you have a percent. It's not the percent profitability, it's the percent move in the underlying. So if you have a 10% move down, you're going to be down here, 10% move up, and so on. So on the vertical axis, it shows you the percent gain, the trade yield. You can set your vertical axis to profit or loss, but it's also over here in dollars. So lots of ways to view this. The margin requirement is what your yield is based on. In this case, it costs $4,500 to put this trade on. And so whatever profit I have divided into that original requirement gives me the yield. So if I made $450, I'd have a 10% yield. And if we change this to, if I clicked on the T+7 timeline there and left it in yield, you see that's 10%. I could switch it back to profit and loss. And there we go, it's $451. So either way you prefer it, but I like to switch back and forth. You do want to know what the dollars are, potentially profit or loss for the trade, and also the yield. All right, so one of the great new features of OptionVue since version 7.30, so if you have 7.30 or higher, we have a new horizontal volatility model. And that is accessible now 2 ways. You can either get there directly from the analyzed graph by clicking Volti Change, and it opens up this box. So what this does is allow you to change the volatility on multiple time frames. We have 30, 60, 90 day, 1-year and 2-year time frames, and it creates this, what we call the volatility cone structure. So that is the actual historical range of volatility for each of those different periods of measuring volatility. So for example, on the 30-day volatility for Amazon, that was the extent, the full range of values for the 30-day volatility on Amazon was between roughly 20 and say 75. And you can actually input a change here. If you thought the volatility would rise as we're coming into earnings, for example, I could put in a +5 here, and it will change everything else accordingly. The other time frames, or we can just say that it's not going to increase any other time frame, just the 30-day, and leave these at 0. But in any event, if I change that volatility up 5%, it shifts the whole graph down. So if there was an event coming, this is how you can quickly model how that volatility change could affect your trade. It's a pretty dramatic result there if I changed volatility by 5%, you saw. Now we have to wait quite a while to get that yield that we were looking at previously. It was going to be a lot sooner. So we can individually set any of these. If I put in 3% here, 2 here, and so on, you could just manually do that. Or you can click, it's interactive on this volatility cone. You could actually move it up here, and it'll move it accordingly as well. And if you decide you want to get back to the default, just click the little pencil eraser. There we are, back to normal. We can also change the time frame we're expecting a change in. And you can put up the weekly here, for example. So if you're doing an earnings calendar, you could just put in that we're expecting a change on that weekly and put in your event date. The event date is always the day after earnings. So if you had earnings coming tomorrow, for example, the event date would be, if it was after the close today, it was your earnings date, then you would put in T+1 as your event date. Trade +1. Your event date would be tomorrow. And say they had a very high volatility here of 80% coming into earnings, for example, or 40%, whatever the case. You could put in a minus. You expect a drop in volatility on that weekly of 20%. It's going to look very strange now, but that's the idea. And then you can get a much more accurate graph if you're doing earnings spreads or calendars using this box. Great new feature. You can also see down here that this CEV number is the constant elasticity of volatility, and this basically tells you how much the shift in volatility will affect each of these different time frames. The greater the variance from 1, the greater the shift in implied volatility will be. So you can see for the front expirations, for the expirations nearer, we're getting a bigger shift because it's further away from 1. We're getting a larger shift than out the 2-year. That's exactly how it occurs. We're going to get a bigger shift on the 30-day as volatility rises or falls than we will going out a year or 2. So this is much more accurately going to model your option prices. It's giving you projected volatilities on the graph, which are going to affect the prices of your options and the timelines, then your projected profit and loss for the whole position. The other way we can get to the, that's what it did based on what I just input there. So everything is squashed up based on that volatility. So I want to get back to the way it was. Just again, click the little pencil eraser, click OK, it goes back to normal. The other way we can get to that volatility window is under the Model tab. We click Model, Volatility, and there it is. So previously, in previous versions of the program, this is what you would be using primarily. It was the vertical skew, and that's still there. And the other button gets you to the model settings. So these are different choices you can use. This is what brokerages primarily use, the EI, OI, O, every individual option on its own. There's no shift in volatility going forward in time for an individual option is basically how that works, so it's a much more simplified model. We recommend using a variable model because it gives a more accurate projection of future prices. But again, the horizontal skew is there. We can input changes here, which will affect anything you're doing with the graphical analysis. So 2 ways to get to that. So next we're going to get into how do you use BackTrader a little bit. So BackTrader has 2 main functions. You can bring in delayed data. So if you're using futures but you don't want to pay the very expensive futures exchange fees, which can add up to hundreds of dollars a month, then what you can do is use delayed data in BackTrader, and there's no exchange fee because you're not getting real-time data. So that's the first use of BackTrader. The second is to actually test based on 13 years now of historical data saved in half-hour increments for almost every asset going back to 2000. So the way we get started on that is click this Net View button and go into BackTrader. And this allows you to set the time. So once I've got the date highlighted, by the way, I saw Matt ask, why do I get insufficient price information or volatility information? One way to correct that is to reload your volatility chart. So what you could do, Matt, is go to File, Delete, Price Chart Files. Delete all your price chart files because the volatility information is located in those price chart files. So once you've deleted them, it'll allow you to reload. There's nothing in there that can't be reloaded from our servers, so the next step would be to go to Net View, Update Price Chart Files, click All Files, click Go. It's going to update everything for every symbol you have in the quotes display, and it'll bring in fresh volatility data. That should clear up the problem. So back to BackTrader, setting up BackTrader. So there we go with the Start window. It's defaulted to store to temporary asset files. We can also store to existing asset files. If you're only using BackTrader, you could do that. I would suggest using store to existing asset files because it'll record a copy of whatever you do in BackTrader on your hard disk. Otherwise, it just gets deleted because it goes into a temporary folder, and that gets erased when you close out of BackTrader. But if you're using Quote View, you don't want your current asset matrix data is what we call an asset file. You don't want your current asset file deleted or overwritten by something you do in BackTrader. So that's why it's set default to store to temporary. If I want to go back 3 years, I can use a hotkey. Just call it Shift less than sign. It'll go back 1 year at a time. If I want to go back 1 day at a time, use the bracket key just to the right of the P on your keyboard. This is all with the date highlighted. Rather than typing in dates, you can just either click once at a time or hold it down. It'll scroll back. So say we wanted to start up on that date in 2010, and you can fine-tune the time of day. Let's say you want to put it right just before the close. And there we go. So we're going to start up on that date. So now we're essentially in a time capsule. Everything in the program is going to act as if you were in that date, July 28, 2010. And all these buttons here, with the exception of OpScan, will operate. OpScan is real-time only. But everything else will operate as though you were in that date with all the available data at that time. So for example, if I put up a price chart, what you see is as of that date only. So you can get a more realistic test by doing that. Assuming you didn't know then or didn't have it memorized what was going to occur, you can just project forward what's going to happen here and then make your trade based on the chart and move forward. And kind of fun that way, just to pretend that you, or even if you do know, just pretend you don't. Just look at the chart and see what you would have done based on that data, not what you already know. I like to put it on the price chart here. I like to set it up so it shows candlesticks, a little bit more information that way. And also moving averages, you can put in, for example, under the indicator tab here, third from the right. moving averages for settings. Put in the 50-day as the blue line, the 200-day as the red line. Click OK. Now I've got a 50 and a 200-day on Amazon as of that date. And if I wanted to keep this in mind, this graph in mind, while I was advancing in backtrade, I'll show you how to be able to view that graph in just a moment here. So say I wanted to test out a credit spread strategy. I'm going to sell something just out of the money. We sell 5 of those, buy 5 of these, convert it. Now it tells me what the cash flow was down here, and my gain is related to the slippage and the commissions. I'm currently losing $30. And the next step is to open up your status screen. That's important. Keep that status screen open because it's creating a value and a graph, a performance graph for you as you do, and you can navigate back to the matrix either by clicking matrix or click window, and then matrix for Amazon. Get back there that way. The next thing we can do is set up a date for our performance graph. Just click the little box here. It'll bring in the date we have there. I'm just going to advance it 1 day. Okay. Back this up. We'll go 1 year forward. You can also just type dates in any field where there's a date. So I put in 7/29. It'll be a 1-year test here. And okay. So now as I advance forward, it's going to track the value of the position. So I go forward 1 day. And I can see down here what the gain loss is going to be. See, it moved up a little bit, recorded a $15 value, and let's see. That graph is being a little stubborn. But we do have unrealized, realized here as well. You can get performance analysis and annualized return from the performance analysis window. And go forward another day. And if I want to flip and see what our original price was, we can easily see that. So I sold those options at that price. There's the current price. So if I had a yield target, you can look at the graph. And the way to be able to see the graphical analysis to track the yield as you're advancing, as well as being able to see the position in the matrix and the price chart instead of flipping back and forth, would be to drop this down. This is a little bit tricky, but we'll walk through it here. So I could restore the matrix down, get it in this mode. Then I click on this box here, which opens up the side-by-side graphical analysis, a little bit different window than the main analyze screen, but essentially the same. Then I could open up the price chart and overlap that. So now I'm seeing all 3 windows at the same time. You just have to resize them so that they fit where you want them. You can quickly do that. Get your matrix looking like you want it. So now I can track forward. Just have to get my position. There it is. Start advancing again. Now you can track everything, including your yield, the price of Amazon, and your position here with your prices of your options by clicking forward like that. So the whole key to the thing is to restore the matrix down and then click the side-by-side graphical analysis and the price chart, and then just resize. Once you've got that set, it'll remember how you wanted your settings, and you can quickly get them back up looking like that. So that's a pretty quick overview. I know that was rushed. There's just you could spend hours and hours going through all the features. but that should get you going a little bit with the program if you're not familiar with it, get you functioning. So back to the matrix here for a moment. Just going to restore this up. Again, a quick review when you're entering anything in the trade column. So if I go back to my position here, if I wanted to propose an adjustment, that is another thing that I didn't cover. Let's do that quickly. So I wanted to buy an extra put here. I could also click the little B button. All right, we're going to have to get out of that. Close out. So what that does is it analyzes the existing position along with any proposed trade. Let's make a more realistic adjustment here. Say if we wanted to sell this one, buy this one. Now click B. So there's my graph with the adjustment, the proposed adjustment. And if you liked it, then you could convert that trade over. And there's your new adjusted condor position. So you got those three views. You got the existing position, the trade only, and both, which will give you a proposed adjustment without actually having to change your position in the transaction log. So one other point, when you're in BackTrader, you do need to have some cash back in the date you started in. So we could go back to 7/29. So I just changed the date of the deposit, or you can actually create the account on the date once you get into BackTrader, starting where you want, then create the account. Click OK. Now my report should fill in. So there's my graph. That was a missing ingredient. I had no cash in there, so it wasn't giving me a value. So that's the last piece of the puzzle there that I didn't tell you. All right, one last thing, OptionView Resources. You can quickly learn a lot more about the program looking under the Support tab. There's the tutorials here. This is in the OptionView.com website. We can get to OptionView 7 tutorials there. There's a user guide. All the OptionView 7 recordings are here, including this one will be recorded. The other thing is you can do is click on View Archive Recordings. It brings up a list of all the recent webinars that have been done. There's the one I did on BackTrader, which went into much more depth on the use of BackTrader and how to set up a testing procedure. If you're interested in that whole thing, this is a very good one for that. Did that last month. And that's about it for today. Let's go back to, I'll end the sharing here to see if there's any questions. I'll quickly answer those. Roger asks, when OV updates are all asset prices and all windows updated? And the answer is yes, if you're in real time, everything will be updated. Whatever you've got open, whether it's a matrix, whether it's in the quotes display, will update automatically. Barry asks, you're moving from the cursor all over the place so fast I can't see where you are. If you're to circle, okay. Good suggestion, Barry. I'll keep that in mind. Rodney says, how can max loss prior to expiration be greater than loss at expiration in that graph? That would have to do with slippage and commissions, Rodney. If you closed out the trade and there was slippage involved, and I did have slippage turned on, I didn't go into the settings for that. If you don't want to see that, then you can just let's go back here for a minute. I'll show you where the settings are for slippage. It's under the Model tab, and this box right here, if I see it was a hit bid ask, That slippage is what's creating the loss. It's going to cost you more to close the trade out than just let it expire. So if you don't want to see that, just go ahead and click None and click OK, and then your trade wouldn't factor that slippage in. Yeah, let's see what else we got here. I already answered Roger's question, I believe. Matt, how do I get insufficient price? Okay. Trying to run Trade Finder. Why do I get insufficient? The most common reason you get insufficient price information is because you haven't defined your targets, Matt. So the way to do that is to actually open up a matrix and refresh your matrix before, or go to NetView Update Asset Files for the assets that you want to use in Trade Finder and make sure they're updated first. You can do that here in NetView Update Asset Files. And before you run Trade Finder, that's a very good idea to update everything. Make sure you have available data there. And then the other thing is you have to make sure that targets are filled in. So you have to set your target here using, if you're doing a whole bunch at once, you can use this little ellipsis box. It'll highlight, use a percentage for all the targets, for all the symbols that you have there. Or you can just click Price here and bring in price for an asset. We don't have any assets here. So you have to bring in your assets here first. We'll just do Apple for one example. And then you can set your price there just by clicking the little box. That was as of that date. If you think you can buy Apple for that now, well, can't. That was as of 2010. So let's see. Date range, we could put in a date or a date range. And you can put in X1 or X2. That's the easiest way. It'll just give you an expiration date there. X2 would be 2 expirations away, and so on. So that's the quick way to do it. Once you've got all that information filled out, it should give you what you need. So let's go back to the questions. You can set a range target on the chart. You can set it in Trade Finder. It'll show up on the chart. Okay. Right, couldn't see my screen on that last one. Let me go back to Share Desktop. There's Trade Finder. So when you're in Trade Finder, you first have to put in an asset, then set the targets. The most common reason you get insufficient price information is there's no target or the asset hasn't been filled in. So as I was suggesting, if you click NetView Update Asset Files, then update all your asset files in that grouping or all asset files in your quotes display, then that should take care of it. But yeah, this is Trade Finder is a whole other subject. I didn't intend on explaining everything in the program, of course, but just to get from the perspective, because we have a lot of new trial users, so that was the focus today. So if you're looking for anything more than that, we'll have to move on to the next, or one of the previous ones I've done for in-depth back trader analysis and so on. Or in the future, we'll get into more depth again, but I want to do a good overview of getting the program set up. So that's it for today. Thank you all for attending, and I'll talk to you again next month. Bye for now.